Hey everybody, I'm so glad you joined me today. You are tuned in to Navigate, and I'm your host, Tim Austin. And today we have two very special guests joining the show. They are longtime friends and colleagues going back a number of years to when we served together in Central Asia. And while our paths have taken different twists and turns, it's always good to catch up as friends, and for the sake of this show and our listeners, to tap into their experience and wisdom on the very important but often confusing theme of suffering. Suffering is a universal theme. It runs throughout life, and we're all impacted by it one way or another, whether we experience it firsthand or vicariously by what's happening around us. And Tracy and Brandi Welterlen are uniquely equipped to share on this topic today. The Welterlens have worked cross-culturally for 17 years in Russia and Central Asia in the sphere of Bible translation. They have two kids, a girl in her first year of university and a boy in high school. They've lived for several years in southwest Germany, where Brandi serves as a counselor and Tracy is a director of technical services to support translation and language projects. And what isn't disclosed in that short bio are some real-life experiences as cross-cultural workers which have profoundly shaped their views on suffering. So this interview, it took place from three separate locations: Germany, Texas, and California. And as a result, the ranges in volume can differ significantly, but don't let that deter you. Just turn it up and listen in. You're in for a real treat today. So let's jump into my conversation with Tracy and Brandi Welterlen. Welcome, Tracy and Brandi. It's so good to have you on the show. I'm excited for this conversation.
Thanks. We're happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Tim.
Yeah. It's we go a ways back. So our times overlapped in Central Asia and serving there as workers for quite a number of years, and we don't often get to catch up now these days since we're in different places. I think the last time we caught up with you was we were at a conference in Budapest, and we rented a car and drove somewhere to Slovenia or Slovakia, and you guys came from Germany, and we met up.
Yeah, we met in Slovenia, as one does.
That's right, Slovenia of all places, right?
Yeah. And then what's the name of the town?
Ljubljana.
Ljubljana. It's just fun to say.
It's just fun to say, yeah.
Yeah, we're having a little.
You remember the name of the town? I didn't remember. I remember the nice lake we were by. That was cool.
Yes.
Yeah, that was fun. And our kids, of course, grew up a lot of their years, younger years, together, and. Yep. Our girls were good friends. And so, it's a lot of things have happened, but we have some great memories and date nights, right? We did our date nights together.
Yes. Yes. We played Cranium, Girls Against Guys.
Guys always won.
That's not how I remember it,
though. I think we may have brought our laundry over to do or take showers at your place when the water was frozen at our house, or sick and moaning on your couch or something.
I remember that too. For some reason we had a pretty good water supply where we were, as opposed to some of the areas in the city. So
yes.
we got our share of guests needing a shower. So.
Yeah.
Great. Well, hey guys, tell me about some of your twists and turns and transitions, because if I remember correctly, Tracy, professionally, you weren't originally trained to do the kind of work you're doing now. You had I'm thinking engineer or something.
Yeah.
Did you get?
Yeah. Okay. So I worked 13 years in aerospace engineering.
Yeah.
St. Louis and Fort Worth. And somewhere along that way toward the end, the Lord started to get a hold of me and take me in a different direction. So I went to seminary and studied linguistics and got prepared to do work in Bible translation. Brandi and I met while I was kind of in the process of that.
Okay. Yeah. It's, you never know when that leading God's leading and calling is going to kind of take a totally different shift. And for you, you were going one direction and were prepared, as far as training and education goes, to make a pretty good. That sounds like it could have been and was at the time a great career, and yet God had something different for you guys.
Yep.
There are quite a few of us geeky engineers.
Is that right?
There's some kind of mental connection.
Okay.
Detailed sort of work.
Okay, so between you're saying engineers and people who go into linguistics
and translation.
Yeah, translation. Okay, interesting. All right, now I could see that where there's be some connection there. What about you, Tracy? Because I'm sorry, Brandi, you had kind of a mid-career or midlife transition as far as profession.
Go ahead and call it a crisis.
We've all had our share of transitions, but yes. Kind of career-wise and professionally, you've made a big shift too. So tell us about that.
Right. I was originally I worked as a speech pathologist for I guess about 4 years, so not too long before Tracy and I started pursuing just membership with our organization and going overseas with our organization. We're kind of just on the side with that when we were in Central Asia, just saw a few kids here and there. And then as we walked through some difficult times and we had help for people training and counseling, I realized that was something I wanted to do and to just sort of be able to pour out to others in that way. So, goodness, I don't know when it started. 8 or 9 years ago, just started thinking about pursuing a degree in professional counseling. So began looking into their programs that I could do online that would work with our life overseas, and found something and got my MA in professional counseling, finished that 3.5 years ago, I suppose. So,
okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then worked, and then kind of we have firsthand experience in this family with all the hours needed to, you need to accumulate, because my wife has done something similar. And so worked on all those hours to get licensed, or you're still working on that?
Working on that. That's been a bit more complicated trying to get the hours overseas.
Oh, yeah.
Then to find a supervisor that works with requirements for Texas.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm working under supervision. The supervision doesn't necessarily count for my licensure at this point, but it's more of a professional accountability now, that it's just good practice to have someone supervising you. So
sure.
A little bit stuck right now as far as getting my license goes, but I'm getting experience. So
yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think, I guess you and Eve, my wife Eve, kind of started moving in that direction close to the same time, I guess. Maybe.
I think she was a couple of years ahead of me, maybe.
Okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting how you think, kind of situations and experiences on the field bring you to this place of, man, I could really use some retooling in this area or that area. And lo and behold, it becomes a passion or something you really love and enjoy. And it becomes kind of eventually a full-time thing. And so, we kind of had those shifts in our lives as well. And,
right.
Me with the coaching and E with the counseling and just, but love that. Never, God always has something new and fresh for us. So yeah. Good. Well, guys, we are going to be, we're going to dive in here to a conversation, which is, a lot of times we don't want to approach this topic or dive in too deep to this topic, but we're going to talk about suffering. And on this podcast, on Navigate, we often circle back to the theme of transition. And so a lot of the episodes we do are somehow tied into transitions. And obviously when it comes to suffering, transitions, especially rug pulled out transitions, I like to call them, like those kinds of transitions that catch us by surprise,
Right.
can set us on a journey of suffering or just some kind of new challenge in our lives that we have to look at and deal with. And sometimes from our limited perspective, we need to, we're kind of being retaught, reschooled in these areas. And I think suffering is that one that we just kind of keep coming back to, and in some ways, depending on life situations and circumstances. So we may talk about transition, but I wanted just to focus on this whole topic of suffering. And during our years in Central Asia, which many of them overlapped as we lived and served there, you guys, and we did as well. We saw many, firsthand, we saw many degrees of suffering, and we entered into it in one way or another, just by the very nature that we were surrounded by suffering, and the poverty around that, and the effects of civil war there in the country, and all of that. What impact did suffering in that context have on you guys?
Yeah, well, for me, it really shook up my worldview. I kind of came from this American narrative that you work hard and you're diligent and you're careful and you follow the rules and you pull yourself up by the bootstraps,
mm-hmm.
and there's success, right?
Yeah.
But we saw people around us who, it didn't matter how hard they worked. There was always somebody ready to take away what they had earned, or illness comes, or there's always something. Many of those people are just kind of on the edge of survival, and so my notions of how the world worked just started to look pretty ridiculous.
Mm.
Yeah, I felt like it just seemed like there was so much there. Like you would hear just story after story of just hard lives,
mm-hmm.
hard situations that didn't seem fair. And it just often felt like, what can you do? Like you look at all this suffering and this pain that these people experience, and it's just, it's so, there's just so much of it there. And it felt like, how do you reconcile this? How do you reconcile this with what we've experienced to be God's goodness and what you see around you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I could say the same for us. And it was, I think that because of our, as a foreigner, just kind of the automatic status you have as a foreigner, and in some ways you're insulated from that. But when you sit with people in that suffering, and I just remember countless times, we would be invited to attend a memorial or funeral, or upon the passing of a friend or a neighbor, and you would see so much just the way they grieved and the way the people experienced loss there and expressed loss, the mourning and the grieving. And we would sit with people and sometimes there wouldn't be a lot of words or conversation, but so we actually learned quite a bit, in terms of how to sit with people in their pain and in their suffering, to listen, and which I personally wasn't very good at, or had little experience in that whole area, in my life. So it was really challenging. So when you when you talk to people in these places and develop relationships with people who can't even they're just making it day to day barely, or can't feed their families. They can't get the support, the resources they need to scratch out a living. And it just, it really shakes up your view of and your theology as if we
you have to kind of rethink how you think of sovereignty and justice and fairness and God's goodness and all that. What you mentioned, the funerals, I remember the first time I overheard, down the street from us, there's a particular time when the women of the family and neighbor women come and they mourn. Like the custom is like this wailing.
Mm-hmm.
It was freaky.
Yeah.
And Brandi, you've been to some of those things. It's it was. I thought it was really strange, but then, I thought this is much more like first century biblical culture, and I wonder if those practices aren't healthier than kind of our Western way of just kind of stuffing those feelings down.
Right. Yeah. Brandi, what did that feel like? And you're in a context of, funeral, and these women are gathering and just mourning like that, wailing, as Tracy said.
Mm-hmm. It's just so much out of my context, what I was familiar with. Like I thought, I didn't know what to do. And we just sit there and be, which I think is a gift. It's a gift for people to give them that, to give them your presence. But at the time, it just felt like, I'm unfamiliar here. I don't know how to wail.
Yeah.
What do you do? But I think looking back and just being there just means so much to anyone in that context too. Now, I could not wail with them, but I could be with them.
Yeah.
And sit with them. So. Yeah.
That was, but as Tracy, as you said, that's quite a shocker, to even just to hear that, and to that expression, giving voice to the grief and the loss in that way, which you just don't see a lot. You see a lot of more, maybe what we would say stuffing it, and just we tend to grieve and mourn quietly or not at all here in our culture. So
crank it down.
Yeah.
I don't think that's healthy at all.
Yeah. Right. So we learned some things, and hopefully that will, I think that just sitting with people in their pain is a big lesson out of all this, and how important that can be,
right.
And meaningful it can be to them. So there's obviously there's a lot of confusion in Christian circles concerning suffering. And why do you think that is?
This is an area I put a lot of thought into. When our son was 2 years old, he was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy. And by the time we got a clinical diagnosis there on the field, we were looking at a situation where he would probably not walk past his teen years, and we'd be burying him by the age of 25. And, just the sweetest little kid. And how I recall having studied this in seminary. My father struggled with this. He was involved in World War II, and he had this problem of God is good and sovereign, and why is there evil in the world? Why do the good guys die young, and other people that maybe don't feel so badly about, they just keep coming back mission after mission? Was his struggle. And so I kind of had this nice, tidy, watertight theological answer for all that. Kind of the typical evangelical. This is, God's in control, God's sovereign, God's good, and we are sinners, and we deserve all this. So anything better than, destruction for eternity is more than we deserve. But, when you're looking at the face of your 2-year-old son, that argument didn't matter anymore. And so it took me on a path of kind of really questioning that whole mindset and that theological viewpoint. And, I struggled with that for a couple years trying to find some other way of answering that question.
Yeah.
I think I'm on the other side of that, but that sort of opened up some other things as well. But so I think that model just it's hard for me to look back at that way of seeing things and say God is good. That's not the God I know. It's not Jesus on the cross as I see him. So
yeah,
that one had to go.
Yeah, that one had to go, but it would set you on a journey of what, searching, discovering,
growth, really.
Growth, yeah.
I mean, we're supposed to grow and change. If we don't, anybody who doesn't grow and change is, you see that in the physical world. Things either are living or they're dying, right?
Yeah.
Staying static is not the point, I don't think.
Yeah. So there's this whole, suffering is a part of the growth process. Is that what I hear you saying?
It sure can be. I kind of joke with people that, normal people get to stay home because they can learn there. And I'm such a thick-headed moron that it took God putting me in a situation where heat was a little higher. And in addition to what was going on in our family with our son, we had just one problem after another with our project and just the challenges of living there and so on. So it was just a part of a whole other story.
Yeah. No, I remember many times. I think we both, we had some guys who got together on Monday mornings for prayer, and we would often be together praying for the translation projects that you were heavily involved in, and all the challenges around that. And so there's also just life and trying to work and get things done in a corrupt and difficult place. Yeah. But add to that a family situation that was super, super hard. And we were talking earlier about just by email, about this whole confusion that exists, and particularly, I don't think it's exclusive to the U.S. Or American culture, church, or whatever. But I do think there's a lot of confusion, and you had mentioned there's confusion because it's hard, and I think that really sums it up, right?
Yeah, and I've heard people say, and I've caught myself thinking, like, give me a break, God. I'm here on the mission field sacrificing for you. Doesn't that count for something?
Yeah.
Shouldn't I get kind of a get out of jail free card or something?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Brandi, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just really similar to what you said. I just wanted it to make sense, and it didn't. And the cliches just didn't work. And so I think coming to this recognition or this acceptance that this may not make sense. This pain may not make sense on this side of heaven. It just may not. We may not see oh, then this happened,
right.
We see his goodness, but, we may not be able to wrap it all up in a bow and say, oh, well, now this all makes sense now. And just learning to be okay with that has been, quite a journey.
Yeah. That's, and that brings me to this whole idea of how our personal experiences and circumstances that we've gone through or that we're going through that are hard and challenging and suffering, how those very things shape our understanding of suffering. And I hear you saying, well, there may be a limit to how much really we'll ever understand this side of heaven, or so you want to maybe expand on that a little bit. What kinds of personal experiences, and we're already kind of getting into that, but what kind of personal experiences or these ones we're talking about have challenged and shaped your understanding of suffering? Either you or Tracy.
I think like walking through what we've walked through with our son Max, and it's an ongoing process because he, as his disease process continues to develop, he has more limitations, and as he grows and his understanding of his limitations grows, he goes through grief cycles at different times, and so just wrestling with you're good, God, and it's not what I can see the side of heaven necessarily in this. Like, this is just hard. It's hard and it's sad. And like, that's not always like on the front of our minds. I don't think about just the weight of it every day. Like, it's there, but it's not always just on the forefront every day. But coming to terms with and wrestling with coming to terms with whatever. Okay, you're good. This may not make sense, but you're good. And we've gone through some other challenges with, raising pretty deep challenges with raising our daughter the past several years too, which has, kind of brought this fresh round of like, okay, so here we are again, God, going through some really, really hard stuff. Are you good? Because I'm really mad at you right now.
Yeah.
Well, my anger doesn't make him good or bad either way. But like, okay, are you good in this? Are you good? So, yeah. What about you, Trace?
Yeah, well, I probably should add the little bit of information that our son was re-diagnosed a few years later, and his life expectancy is normal. But I mean, that he's still got this disease. He still uses a wheelchair every day, and that's not the point. We really want to jump to, because we're so uncomfortable with suffering in our culture, we want to jump to the happy ending. Well, it's all going to turn out well, or look, this happened, or well, God's got great plans for your son. He's going to use him to do this and that, or he's such an inspiration, and he's a great kid, but he would rather not have muscular dystrophy. He would love to be able to walk and ride a bicycle and run and go out for soccer with his friends. So yes, you can see good things, and that's a positive, useful thing to do, but I'm thinking of people who are in that suffering position. That is not helpful, because that's not what they need to hear at first. What they need to hear first is, this is really hard. Yeah. This really sucks where you are right now, and I wish you weren't going through this, and I'm here with you.
Right. So you're saying what they really need to hear is more of acknowledging the pain, acknowledging the hardship, acknowledging the suffering, and either say that or just sit and listen, or
just shut up
and say nothing at all. But yeah. We so often are tempted to just give pat answers, aren't we?
Yeah, and that's really mostly for us.
Yeah,
we want there to be a happy ending because we're really uncomfortable with it. And what it communicates to the other person is, your grief is not okay. You should stop crying and have faith and trust God. Yeah. And what you're doing is, being sad is not okay.
Right. Yeah. This just kind of brought up a question for me, because we have quite a few of our listeners who are living and working cross-culturally, raising families. They have kids. They have kids with various challenges, whether that be physical, emotional, you name it, or just even education-wise, and dealing with some of the things that we deal with that we don't necessarily think would be challenges, but they come to be because of the context we're living in. But how do you as parents decide? How do you weigh the when it comes to the decision-making process, weighing it out and saying, okay, what is best for our kids? What is best for our family? What is best for us as as a married couple, can we stay? Can we stay in this context? Can we live here? Do we need to leave? Do we need to move somewhere else? Because you guys have experienced that, and there may be some people out there that are struggling with this. So any thoughts around that?
Oh, goodness.
Go ahead, babe.
I don't know if we did it very well at all. Well, okay, I'll just share a little of our experience here. When our son was diagnosed, like, we were just like, we're going to do this.
Uh-huh.
We're going to do this.
And you were in Central Asia at the time.
Yes, we were in Central Asia. So we already had a furlough scheduled. So we went home for our scheduled furlough. He got a more specific diagnosis, which wasn't quite, it was still muscular dystrophy. Wasn't quite as dire as what we had thought it was going to be. We thought, okay, great, we're going back. And it was just hard because we were still living with this, I guess, grief, and we're still trying to understand how we understood it theologically and whatever, and feeling very protective of our son in an environment where actually strange accidents do happen and weird things do happen, and the medical system isn't so great there, and feeling just like this sense of like hyper arousal about every possible thing that could happen to him, and feeling so protective was kind of exhausting, kind of put us at our margin. And so we didn't really think that through because we didn't realize it was going to be like that going back. I know I was like living there was no margin for me because I was just so thinking all the time about, well, just grieving, caring for him, caring for our daughter, and how it was impacting them, and then just feeling so hyper vigilant about his safety. So all that to say, I would say for families dealing with similar things is to be aware. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to leave the field at all, but be aware that it is going to impact your lives. Mm-hmm. That this is going to take some of your margin to live well with us on the field. And so just be aware of that. And it's okay that happens, that you're going to have to reevaluate priorities, how much capacity you may have. Mm-hmm. And it's not a thing where you can look at, say, oh, my capacity goes to this, 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 and this. Right. Part of your capacity just goes through the mental and emotional work it takes to lead your family and work, help your family function well with what you have. And so it's okay to have a lesser capacity. And it's probably wiser to realize that than to try and push through and say, nope, we got this, we're fine, we're good. Yeah. But just to realize that it is going to affect your capacity, and it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it takes so much energy and time and training to get to the field that for the first several years, I couldn't imagine not being there. This is God's call, and it's plan, and yada yada. So, failure was just not an option for me personally. It was really unhealthy way of looking at things, and it put a lot of pressure on our relationship. We could not ever even have that conversation about should we go home.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. Just the tension and the conflict potentially with husband and wife in some of these areas, depending on how we are dealing with this situation, and even some of our own history and theology of suffering comes into play there. And how did you guys, because we're talking a little bit about, things getting shaken up here in terms of our belief system, and then setting us on a journey toward growth and discovery. So how do you do that together, but also give space to each other to wrestle with God on their own terms and in their own way? Because there is obviously the potential for conflict, disagreement. How did you guys find yourself doing that?
Good question. Well, yeah, here's the answer. Keep trying to hold it together until you burn and crash in burnout and depression.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And then you're forced to go off the field. I mean, this is the recipe for success as far as I'm concerned. Well, that's what we did anyway. I don't really recommend it.
Yeah.
But that's what it took was we kind of put ourselves then in a crisis situation.
Okay. So we're trying to push through.
We just kept trying to push through and make it work,
Yeah.
And then we got to the end where Brandi said before, she was operating with zero margin. Well, we operated that way for another 2 or 3 years. And then finally all came crashing down. And we were ready to, let's just give everything away and buy tickets and get out of here.
So you get the initial diagnosis of your son, and then so basically for 2-3 years you were really pushing through until you came to a kind of a crash and burn place.
Something like that. Maybe
something like that.
Longer.
Okay.
something ridiculous.
Yeah. Tracy, Brandi, anything to add there?
Yeah, it wasn't a topic of conversation that, hey, we're not doing well, we need to reevaluate. And that probably would have helped us to have those conversations earlier on. But we were afraid of those conversations because, it was our identity to be cross-cultural workers and to be there.
Yeah.
And so we didn't allow ourselves to have those conversations. It would feel like failure. She brought up the failure word, Tracy, and it's like, it's actually not failure. If you have to look at each other and say, this isn't working, we don't have margin, we don't have capacity, it's not failure to say we need to pull back, we need to go home. God is still good. It would be a different kind of hard to go home. It's a kind of hard that's not as... not what we'd expected. And some of us are willing to go onto the field and suffer in that way.
Yeah.
But having that dream or that door closed and going home and suffering that other way almost sounds like, we can't do that. We can suffer there on the field, but we can't suffer with our loss of this dream or something like that. And so...
Right. It's a different kind of disobedience in the end. Like the wise, caring, loving thing to do for each other in that situation would have been to have that conversation and talk it through. But I, looking back personally, I think my ego was driving the show for me. And I couldn't face that kind of future, that kind of failures I saw.
Yeah.
So we ended up going to a counseling center, and that's kind of where Brandi got her inspiration to get into counseling. But it was very helpful, and it allowed us to kind of decompress, talk through some things, recognize the really unhealthy dynamic we were just describing, and then have a conversation about, what does the future look like? And reached a decision that, okay, we are not sustainable as a family where we are. We can get back to a place where we can function if we know it's not forever.
Yeah.
And I think at that time we decided we could do it 2 more years to get the local team transitioned and raise up some new leadership and then be ready to move on. Am I remembering that correctly?
Okay. Yeah.
Brandi?
Yeah. I'm trying to think. I don't really know what to add to that. I even wonder now, looking back, giving ourselves 2 more years to be there, was that wise? I mean, it's what we did. It's what happened,
Yeah.
But I think that when we went to the intensive counseling in Thailand, it helped us to sort of see where we were. It was so helpful. It didn't solve everything. It doesn't. But absolutely helped us to see what got us to where we were. And help us to see ways forward. So I think we did feel like we wanted to, whatever we thought it looked like, we wanted to finish well and be able to hand over the work to our local colleagues and stuff too.
Yeah.
And I will say too, I just want to add, it was our experience. And I don't want to come across as saying if you have a difficult situation or a child with special needs, you should leave the field.
Right.
I think every situation is unique. I just think that we personally weren't willing to recognize the toll it was taking on our family. And so, just throw that out there too.
Well, and it would be fun to hear, this may be another podcast, but another conversation, but it would be fun to hear more about how that has evolved for you, that process, that journey. It wasn't an all or nothing thing for you. You didn't have to leave the field. You had to adapt.
Right.
Right. And so sometimes we get into these crisis situations and get this tunnel vision of, it's all or nothing kind of thing. We have no options, but
that's true. That's true.
Right. And I think that your story is hopeful because, the calling continues, the story continues, but it's evolved and adapted. But you had to be willing to do that, and to think through those options. And I think that's a hopeful thing. And, yeah.
And like, God isn't static either.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are qualities about him that are unchangeable too.
Right.
But I think we get caught up in, I have to do this. This is my calling.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to let him down and things are going to be ruined.
Right.
If things do change. Like, that's not really true. That is like an all or nothing.
Yeah, God's doing this face palm thing. Like, oh, I didn't see that coming. Those guys are.
Yeah.
Can't do anything now. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I don't think so.
Yeah. So guys, how would you, what's some advice that you would give to again, our listeners who are going through, experiencing various degrees of suffering and struggling, and could be on the in the beginning stages of that, could have recently just had some news that has kind of rocked their world, or they've been on a journey, or they're at that place of maybe crashing and burning, could be anywhere along that spectrum. But how do you give voice, I guess, how do you give voice to the disillusionment, the anger, the confusion, and the many other raw emotions people feel in suffering and experiencing that? What's helped you guys?
I think the raw emotions are so, use counselor's term, valid.
Uh-huh.
And okay. It's really okay to wrestle and to feel the conflicting things and the layered emotions and the confusing things. It's not only okay, it's really helpful in your journey through it to recognize and name and allow yourself to feel those things.
Yeah.
Also, I think as you journey through, as you allow yourself to feel, allow yourself to wrestle with the Lord, he really does build beauty into the process and into the story to where, I see, like the cliches are just like so frustrating to me. But I will say that so much beauty can come out of the really hard stories, the unexpected turns. And God can really enable you to sit well with others, which is such a precious gift to be able to do that, to be able to, because of what you've experienced, you're not afraid of other people's pain and be able to sit with them in pain.
Right.
So that's what that comes to mind.
There's also, the redemptive piece in that. Yeah.
Yes. And it's okay to not rush to see the redemptive and good in it. It's okay if it doesn't make sense
right away.
For a very long time. Right. If it's just, I know this is hard, and it's okay to really talk to the Lord about the hard and to wrestle with him in it, because he is in there with it. He's not going to be afraid of your wrestling. He's not going to be afraid of the questions in it.
Right.
So, there's that. And I think too, just it's okay to recognize a diminished capacity or a turn in the road where plans are modified. It doesn't mean that things are ruined or things aren't working out. But there can be, other ways forward too. Yeah,
that's good. Yeah. Tracy, anything to add there?
Yeah, if I just add, just find a way to get it out and express it.
Yeah.
Prayer or with other people. I think, honestly, it sounds weird, but to hear yourself say what you're thinking has some power to it. And the other thing is, it's just my personal opinion, but I think God kind of prefers us to be honest with him. And I think somebody said the truth shall set you free. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily think that's a capital T truth about some kind of theology. It's about just be honest about what's really happening. Because
Yeah.
you're not, I mean, okay, we can cover it up and we can fake it when we go to church on Sunday morning, but we're not fooling God. And that's the truth about what's happening in you is the way to growth and healing and all the other good stuff, the beauty that Brandi's talking about.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, allow yourselves, I think you mentioned, Brandi, allow yourself to feel, and the feelings and the words kind of come out, play off of each other, right? They come out at this, as you're allowed and feel free to express more the words, the raw emotions, then you are allowing yourself to feel. And I think there's something to be said for allowing each other to feel too,
Right.
you know, as spouses, sometimes depending on how we're wired, you know, allowing no words to be okay in a certain context, and then allowing maybe the more expressive person to vent or to express that. There is there's something to be said of giving space for each other, for sure.
Yeah, I remember actually John and Becky Leverington, who,
Mm-hmm.
you and Eve know.
Yeah.
They met with us. They happened to be at our conference, which is just when we got Max's diagnosis. And Becky said, well, you guys are going to grieve differently.
Yeah.
And so learn to give each other room for that. And that was really helpful because, as Tracy and I are very different people, grief looks different on us. And his grief is, the way he processes it is very important to him. The way I process it is very important and needful to me. So learning how that looks in your relationship is important too.
Yeah. Well, this has been really great, you guys. We're kind of getting ready to wrap up the conversation, but you know, there's so much when we're going through suffering, and of course there's the classic Book of Job scenario, you know, that we see here, where, you know, well-meaning people try to say or do things that just aren't helpful, you know. What have as those who have come alongside, and at some point all of us are called to come alongside those dealing with loss and suffering. What would you say, things that maybe well-meaning people have tried to say or do that just hasn't been helpful for you? Maybe we can just gain some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it was kind of weird how many times it happened, but we have these local friends in Central Asia would say, oh yeah, I knew this guy, some relative's child of ours or a neighborhood kid was like this, you know, they were not very strong in walking and so on. They just got some special massage in it and it's all better now. And, you know, it's in that culture, it's particularly intense because it's kind of like the culture of Jesus' day where illness is seen as a curse from God. So you didn't see disabled people in wheelchairs out on the street. Well, partly because they didn't have medical equipment. But it's a shame to the family to have that kind of illness. And so they were kind of kept at home, sort of hidden from the rest of the world, because that brings shame on their family. But
you very seldom saw disabled people out in public, right?
Yeah.
And if you did, they were often begging.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not dissimilar from Job. I mean, Job's friends came and said, well, you must have some sin in your life because this bad things have happened.
Yeah.
You know, in Western theology, we've kind of moved away from that, but it's still kind of hanging around there. There's a little bit of a doubt.
Yeah. I think people of meaning well have asked us if we've prayed, and it's like, well, yeah.
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 Did you just ask me that?
Yeah. There have been people who have prayed over Max and then been like, okay, you're healed. And it's like, And I really didn't want that to affect Max's faith.
Sure.
Or his belief in God's goodness. Because he can heal. He is absolutely able to heal. But that doesn't always happen. And he's still good.
Yeah.
We don't understand it really, but he's still good. And that's been like, I wanted to like just say, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, pray for him and pray with him.
Mm-hmm.
But be really careful about what you're communicating to him in this too. So.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Yeah. Again, these are often well-meaning people, and it's hard not to just like you say, Brandi, just to get so frustrated and angry at those kind of pat answers or things that people say that would in their good intentions, but yeah. And I think this is just helpful for us, as we've talked about today, just how sitting with people in their pain and listening well and being slow to speak, and just so many things that are just pretty basic, but super, super important for us. Great reminders.
Yep. Yeah.
Good. Well, last question for you guys here, I think, unless something else comes up. How can we best support those around us who are suffering, whether they be immediate family members or others in our places of ministry and life? How can we best support them?
One thought I have about that is just that communicating that God sees them. I like the notion of solidarity. That's kind of a new theological notion to me. You could even see that the cross is about solidarity with humanity. So if we kind of take it from that point of view, we're just demonstrating that we're with people, and that the cross shows that God is with us as well. In that sense, He knows your pain. And, and
that
so
really is the incarnational model.
That's another good term for it.
Yeah.
And Jesus told his disciples, the stuff that I've been doing, you go do that too. So and it may not seem like a big deal, but Jesus talked about a cup of cold water that seemed to matter to him. So that might be the risk of you going into a situation. You think, well, I don't have any answers for people. I don't know how to relieve their pain. That's not the point. It's just be there and respond and grieve with them, and that is worth more than.
That's good.
My opinion.
I think also, like, just going back to where someone is in their suffering. If it's like something that's just hit, it's really intense. Like, okay, hierarchy of needs here. Do they need meals for them? Do they need someone to do their laundry?
Mm-hmm.
And this is just practical stuff, but instead of saying, let me know if you need something, how about take the burden off of them letting you know if they need something, and say, I'm taking your laundry and I'll bring it back tomorrow, or I'll, this is the day I'm bringing you a casserole, or I'm going to. Cross-culturally, it's a little different because you wouldn't take a casserole.
That's good.
Yeah. And just keep in mind that kind of physiologically, when emotion is really, really strong, it's just sapping all kinds of energy out of you. And it's basically turning your brain to mush. So, their ability to figure out what they need is pretty minimal. So feel free to jump in.
Yeah. That's great practical advice from folks like you who have been there in that situation where you could just use that meal being delivered, to your home, and you can use.
Hey, sorry about that.
That practical dropped off.
I could use that today, actually. No.
Oh, okay. Well, that might be a little tricky, but.
Yeah. This has been super, super helpful, you guys. And I feel like our listeners are going to be really encouraged, in some ways challenged, but also encouraged and know that, we are not alone. The whole of Jesus, the whole, idea that you just mentioned, Tracy, of Jesus being present with us, identifying with us, meeting us where we're at, the incarnational Jesus, just in the flesh, and how he modeled that for us. And I love the fact that you mentioned his words of, he said, you'll do even greater things than these. And sometimes we often look at the greater things as the signs and wonders and the miracles, and they certainly can be and should be, but he also had amazing just acts of simple compassion and love toward people. The cup of cold water analogy, fits great here, because it's these are all practical things, and like I think like you were saying earlier, people don't have the capacity even sometimes to receive something that would be, we would say, some great proclamation of faith, to be healed or something, but they do have the capacity to receive from us in some way. We just need to be sensitive to what does that look like in this moment at this time.
Yeah, and maybe at some point in their process, they need to yell and cry and curse at God.
Yeah.
And can you sit there and be there when they're doing that, even if it kind of strains every theological bone in your body?
Right.
To listen to that, but that's what they need to be able to do at that point.
Right.
Doesn't mean they're going to stay there, but
yeah. Well, hey guys, thanks so much for joining me for this conversation. I almost feel like we need to do a part 2 sometime, to hear how the story is on, from a personal experience standpoint, how it's unfolded for you. So if you guys would be willing to do that, let's try it sometime here in the near future. But again, I'm just so grateful that we were able to have this conversation. I know it's going to be encouraging for our listeners. Yeah. Thanks for joining me, Tracy and Brandi. And I hope we get to meet up sometime, whether it be somewhere in the middle of Europe or back here in the States or wherever that happens. But I think we're about due, for a face-to-face.
Great. The counselor in me has had a hard time answering all these questions without asking you, Tim, how you're doing. So. Okay,
well, we'll I'll just say we are we're going on 4 years, believe it or not, in our big transition from overseas. So I always tell people give it time, because big transitions take time. So some ways I wake up in the morning, or I'm going through my day, and I just feel like I'm still smack dab in the middle of transition. And then other days I feel like I got a pretty good handle on things, but
sounds about normal.
Yeah. Okay, guys, great talking to you. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Tim.
You too. Say hi to Eve for us.
Will do. Bye-bye. Making sense out of difficult transitions is never easy. But when the transition involves human suffering, which hits so close to home, the challenges grow exponentially. And Tracy and Brandi have shared from their experience, vulnerably and authentically from their unique story. And one thing that grabs my attention and really challenges me is the resilience they display and the confidence they have in God, not only in spite of, but in many ways because of the suffering they've known. The writer of Hebrews admonished suffering believers not to throw away their confidence, because it would be richly rewarded. Don't give up. You may never make sense of it all, but know this: there is a redemptive part of the story, a story still being written. And I encourage you to reflect on the 10th chapter of Hebrews as a way of solidifying what you've heard today. If you feel like you have a personal story to tell that would encourage our listeners, we'd love to consider having you as a guest on Navigate. Just start by submitting a podcast guest inquiry form using the link provided in the podcast section of my website homepage, EncompassLifeCoaching.com. Thanks for listening in. I'm your host, Tim Austin, and I look forward to you joining me on the next episode of Navigate. Until next time.